Your network show right here on 910 AM, the Superstation, the Future Radio. I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. So I saw this story from the Associated Press and from the Griot.com, as well as local affiliate there in Mississippi, whichever one this is a local affiliate in Mississippi. Well, whichever one this is, I can't see it. But Governor Tate Reeves of Mississippi has signed into law. This is WFAB out of Mississippi. He signed into law a bill that is really an anti-critical race theory bill. It's really an anti-critical race theory bill. Mississippi governor signs law limiting race in lessons. Mississippi governor signs law limiting race in lessons. And when you hear his explanation about this, it's so stupid. Okay. And Governor Tate Reeves, of course, is a Republican. These are the ones signing these, pushing these anti-critical race theory laws, and the governor signing them into law. This is an example of how elections have consequences. And what this does is this causes a lot of fear for teachers in schools, because it's very ambiguous, what they can actually teach and not violate these idiotic policies. But we're going to talk about this and deal with critical race theory once again. And then tied to this, and I'm going to let you hear from Governor Tate Reeves and how stupid he sounds as well. Mississippi Governor Tate Reeves signed a bill Monday, March 14th, to limit how race can be discussed in classrooms, and it became law immediately. Governor Tate Reeves said, contrary to what some critics may claim, this bill in no way, no shape, and in no form prohibits the teaching of history. Any claim that this bill will somehow stop Mississippi kids from learning about American history is just flat wrong. Now, the short title of Senate Bill 2113 says it would prohibit, quote, critical race theory, but the main text of the legislation does not mention or define critical race theory. And many supporters of the bill also have said they cannot define it. So they're trying to ban, once again, fear tactic coming from Republicans who are not pushing really any policies that are beneficial to average Americans, especially African Americans. They're passing laws to ban teaching something that, one, is not taught in K through 12 schools. Two, these idiots can't even explain what it is that they're trying to ban, what it is they're so afraid of. We're going to break this down. Now, also, there was a interview that I saw a few months ago with Dr. Carol Anderson. Dr. Carol Anderson is a professor at Emory University, African-American female historian, brilliant sister. And she was interviewed by two white parents in Georgia about critical race theory, what it is and what it is not. I'm going to share some of that interview with you because she really breaks this down to explain what critical race theory is and what it is not. And one of the things she talks about is the Stono Rebellion. Well, she talks about the Negro Act of 1740 in South Carolina. The Negro Act of 1740 in South Carolina. So we'll also, on today's show, talk about the Stono Rebellion. We'll talk a little bit about the Stono Rebellion of 1739 in South Carolina, which is one of the largest slave rebellions in the country, in the history of this country. And the Negro Act of 1740 is connected to the Stono Rebellion of 1739 because Dr. Carol Anderson talks about the Negro Act of 1740. All right. And I teach about all this in the online classes that I teach: ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Maafa. Understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. I do that class on Saturdays, 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And then on Sundays, I teach from the Civil War to the Civil Rights Movement and Black Power, 1865 to 1968. Now, on the African History Network show, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world. Because right now, it's correct your own behavior. What you do for yourself, what you do to yourself, and what you allow other people to do to you and get away with is based upon what you think about yourself. What you think about yourself is based upon what you have been taught about yourself. What you've been taught about yourself is based upon everything you've read, heard, and seen about yourself. All right, I want to go to I want to go back to this piece here from Channel 9. This is Channel 9, WAFB out of Mississippi. WAFB Channel 9 out of Mississippi. This is an article, Associated Press, that different news outlets picked up. Okay, so they talk about Senate Bill 2113. Senate Bill 2113. The new law says no school, community college, or university could teach that any sex, race, ethnicity, religion, or national origin is inherently superior or inferior. It sounds like they're afraid to talk about white supremacy and racism, what it is and how it works. So this applies to community colleges, universities, K through 12 public schools, charter schools. Nobody can teach in the state of Mississippi that had the most number of lynchings from 1882 to 1968, 581 lynchings. And these lynchings were done by white men largely. No one can teach that any sex, race, ethnicity, religion, or national origin is inherently superior or inferior. The ACLU, American Civil Liberties Union, said in the statement that laws opposing critical race theory are, quote, are thinly veiled attempts to silence discussions of race and gender amongst student and educators, end quote. We're going to continue this on the other side of the break. I'm going to let you hear how stupid Governor Tate Reeves also sounds. You listen to the African History Network show. I'm Michael Imhotep. We'll be back in a few minutes. All right, stand by, everybody. Back from break in 4 minutes. How's everybody doing? Hey, if you like this type of information, you can support the African History Network, $ the AHN show through Cash App, $ the AHN show through Cash App, also through PayPal, paypal.me / the AHN show, paypal.me / the AHN show. Okay, back from break in 4 minutes. We had 6 days a week. This helps us keep doing the research, stay on the air, keep broadcasting, pay some of the bills, pay for all these services that I use. Okay, stand by. Back from break in 4 minutes. Calling numbers 313-778-7600. 313-778-7600 is the calling number if you have a question or comment. Who still needs to register for the online classes I teach on Saturdays and Sundays? Yeah, 313-778-7600 is the call-in number. Who still needs to register for the online classes I teach on Saturdays and Sundays? And then we have a new class starting up Saturday, March 19th. Great African Women in History, the Mothers of Civilization. All right, back from break in 2 minutes. Stand by, everybody. All right, and we have a new online class starting up Saturday, March 19th. Great African Women in History, the Mothers of Civilization. I'll post this information here for this. So the class is $25. It's 2 consecutive Saturdays. It's a 4-hour online class. Great African Women in History, the Mothers of Civilization.
History Network show. We deal with current events in history and politics, education, economic empowerment, entrepreneurship, relationships, love, sex, health issues, and much, much more. Unfortunately, many people confuse what racism is. Racism is a power structure. It was laws and policies that put us in this predicament. It's going to be laws and policies that take us out. So when you control the radius of a man or woman's thoughts, you control the compass of his or her actions, because the mind can't do or teach what it doesn't know.
We have it all on 910 AM Superstation.
Welcome back to the African History Network show right here on 910 AM Superstation, the Future Radio. I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. It is Tuesday, March 15th, 2022. Call-in numbers 313-778-7600 is the call-in number if you have a question or comment. 313-778-7600 is the call-in number if you have a question or comment. Okay, remember, we are celebrating our 12th year anniversary of me broadcasting and hosting the African History Network show. We debuted March 10th, 2010, originally. So I've been doing this for 12 years. So thanks for your support. You can continue to support the African History Network through Cash App and PayPal, $ the AHN show through Cash App, $ the AHN show through Cash App. Also through PayPal, paypal.me/the AHN show. This helps us keep doing the research, stay on the air, keep broadcasting, pay some of the bills, etc. All right, and I'll let you know about my new online class, Great African Women in History, the Mothers of Civilization. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. Okay, I want to go back to Governor Tate Reeves. I want to go back to this story here out of Mississippi. We're going to clip one in just a second, Shakita. Governor Tate Reeves on Twitter. So if we go back to this piece here from WFAB Channel 9 out of Mississippi, this talks about the bill that Governor Tate Reeves signed into law on Monday, March 14th. Okay, and this is Senate Bill, I think it's 2113. Senate Bill 2113. Okay, so what we continue to find is that these Republicans that want to ban critical race theory from being taught in schools, and it's not taught in K through 12 schools, they have a hard time defining what critical race theory is in the first place. So what is it that you're afraid of? What is it that you're trying to ban? The ACLU, American Civil Liberties Union of Mississippi, said in a statement that laws opposing critical race theory, quote, are thinly veiled attempts to silence discussions of race and gender amongst student and educators, end quote. Now, the Republican-controlled in the state house, in the state legislature in Mississippi, is controlled by Republicans. Okay, former Confederate state. Surprise, surprise, surprise. This is one of the reasons why it's important to vote. Politics is the legal distribution of scarce wealth, power, and resources, and the writing of laws, statutes, ordinances, amendments, and treaties, their adoption, interpretation, and enforcement. Elections have consequences. People like Governor Tate Reeves, a lot of these Republicans in Mississippi have to be voted out of office. Okay, you have to vote better people in office, especially Cindy Hyde-Smith, the public hanging woman, this U.S. senator from Mississippi. When next time she's up for re-election, she has to be voted out of office. Trump supporter, Cindy Hyde-Smith. They said so. The Republican-controlled House voted 75 to 43 to pass the bill March 3rd, 2021, after a 6-hour debate in which several African-American lawmakers gave impassioned speeches in opposition. Now, the Democrats are in the minority in the state house, in the state legislature in Mississippi. The African-American lawmakers said the legislation could squelch honest discussion about the harmful effects of racism because parents could complain if history lessons make white children feel uncomfortable. Parents could complain if history lessons make white children feel uncomfortable. Now, when the bill passed the Republican-controlled state Senate in January of 2022, I should say, 2022, March 3rd, 2022, when the bill passed the Republican-controlled state Senate in January of 2022, all of the black state senators withheld their votes and walked out in protest. And I remember seeing that on the news, and actually on Roland Martin Unfiltered, he showed the footage of them walking out in protest. Republicans across the country have been raising money by saying critical race theory is a threat, and multiple Republican-led states have banned or limited the teaching of critical race theory or similar concepts through laws or administrative actions. Now, as I've said before, you're going to see that critical race theory is going to be a lightning rod, is going to be a topic in the 2022 midterm elections that Republicans are going to run on, banning critical race theory. They're going to quote Dr. King. Okay, he wants his children to be judged by the content of their character, not by the color of their skin. But they don't tell you the speech that Dr. King said that in, which was originally called Normalcy Never Again. Then it was called A Camp Check. And then years later, it was called I Have a Dream, because the original name of the speech is not I Have a Dream, because the speech wasn't about a dream. In that speech, Dr. King is talking about dismantling white supremacy and racism. If you actually read the speech, you can go to loc.gov, Library of Congress website, or archives.gov. If you actually read the text of the speech, he's talking about dismantling white supremacy and racism, and he's calling out America on its hypocrisy, and he's talking about holding America accountable for a promissory note we were given 100 years prior in January of 1863 with the Emancipation Proclamation. And he says when we take that promissory note to the bank, is marked insufficient funds. So they don't even understand the speech that they're quoting Dr. King from. He's talking about dismantling white supremacy and racism. You can't dismantle what you don't want to talk about. So let's go to clip one, Shakita. Here's dumbass Governor Tate Reeves explaining this idiotic bill that he signed into law. Let's go to the clip one.
Now, I can almost guarantee what will happen next. First, critical race theory proponents will claim that this law prevents the teaching of history. They'll claim that our kids won't learn about important historical events like slavery or the civil rights movement. But we know the truth. Contrary to what some critics may claim, this bill in no way, in no shape, and in no form prohibits the teaching of history. Any claim that this bill will somehow stop Mississippi kids from learning about American history is just flat out wrong. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. All elements of Mississippi and all elements of American history, both the good and the bad, should be taught in our schools, period. I don't know how much clearer I can be. Second, Mississippi will become subjected to an onslaught of insults. There will be false assertions that our state is racist. Our education system will be dragged through the mud and demeaned.
Pause it right there. Pause it right there. Pause it right there. Hold on. This, he just said there'll be false assertions that our state, Mississippi, is racist. Have you ever studied the history of racist Mississippi? Are you serious? Mississippi is the lynching capital of America. This dude is governor right now. This is what happens when you let dumbasses get into politics. He's the governor of Mississippi. Let's go back to this clip, Shakita.
Better than the national average. But despite the arrows that will be volleyed at us, we're not backing down. We can't back down. Our kids are our greatest assets, and Mississippi will do whatever we can to protect them. So to those looking to tear us down, you do what you got to do. Because at the end of the day, Mississippi will do what's right. Thanks, and God bless.
Okay, when has Mississippi done what's right? I'm just asking. Was that before or after you seceded from the Union and joined the Confederacy because you wanted to maintain slavery? Was that before or after you had 581 lynchings from 1882 to 1968? Was that before or after Emmett Till was lynched August 28, 1955? Was that before or after Medgar Evers was shot in the back by Byron Della Beckwith, June 1963? When the hell has Mississippi ever done what's right? I'm just curious. Just let me know. I just want to know. Okay, when has Mississippi? See, this is why people like this have to be voted out of office, period. And this is why these white supremacists are trying to suppress our vote. Okay, because if you go back to 1890, these people like Governor Tate Reeves, people like the white supremacists who voted for this bill, okay, they want to implement the Mississippi Plan all over again. What was the Mississippi Plan of 1890? The Mississippi Plan of 1890 was when they rewrote the state constitution in Mississippi to exclude the Negro. When the hell has Mississippi ever done what's right? That's what I want to know. We've talked about this before. I deal with this in my classes. The Mississippi Plan was the plan of the Mississippi State Legislature, the white supremacists in the Mississippi State Legislature. The majority of the voters in Mississippi in 1890 were African Americans, many of them former slaves. And these white supremacists rewrote the state constitution in Mississippi to impose poll taxes and literacy tests to suppress the African American, and black people were the majority of the voters in Mississippi. Solomon Saladin Calhoun, who was the white county judge who presided over the Mississippi State Convention of 1890, he said, "Let's tell the truth if it bursts the bottom of the universe." He said, "We came here to exclude the Negro. Nothing short of this will answer." The Mississippi Plan became the model that other southern states adopted to rewrite their state constitutions in 1895 with South Carolina, 1901 with Alabama. Okay, then you had Georgia, you had Louisiana, 1898. They copied what Mississippi did. Delegates eventually adopted a literacy test and poll tax geared to press the black vote in a state with a black majority. The majority of the population, the majority of the voters in Mississippi in 1890 were African Americans. The Mississippi Plan became the model throughout the South, part of a raft of racially oppressive Jim Crow laws that ended Reconstruction. We'll continue this on the other side of the break. You listen to the African History Network show right here on 910 AM Superstation and Future Radio. I'm Michael Imhotep. We'll be back in a few minutes. Stand by. All right, how's everybody doing? Share this broadcasting on social media platforms. Invite your friends to tune in. Okay, Irma. Hey, thanks, Irma Fly Girl. Thanks for the donation, Irma. We appreciate that. You can support us $ the TheAHNShow through Cash App. It's Fly Girl. Fly Girl. She may not want me to say her name. It's Fly Girl here on Facebook and YouTube. $ the TheAHNShow through Cash App and through PayPal, paypal.me/TheAHNShow. Okay, let me get ready for this next segment here. Stand by, back from break in 4 minutes. Back from break in 2 minutes. Okay, back from break in 1 minute.
The Superstation, Detroit's only African-American talk radio.
Welcome back to the African History Network show right here on 910 AM Superstation, the Future Radio. I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. It is Tuesday, March 15th, 2022, and we are live. All right. I want to remind you, we have a brand new online course starting up Saturday. It's March 19th and Saturday, March 26th, 2022. Great African Women in History, the Mothers of Civilization. It's 12 noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and I'll profile over 100 women of African descent all throughout different time periods: antiquity, ancient deities, revolutionaries, politicians, scientists, sports figures, entertainers, those who are leaders in science, medicine, etc. Okay, great African women in history, the mothers of civilization. I do a PowerPoint presentation. We have book references, articles, video clips. March is Women's History Month. I've done this lecture in the past a number of times, but this is an expanded version. We're going to deal with over 100 different African women in all different time periods. Great African women in history, the mothers of civilization. This online class is $25. We do the sessions live. All the sessions are archived and recorded. So even after the class is over, if you can go back and watch as much as you want to. So even a year from now, you have full access to it for perpetuity. So even a year from now, you can go back and watch the full class. Okay, so be sure to register for that. All right, I want to go back to Governor Tate Reeves. We were talking about this disturbing bill that Governor Tate Reeves, Republican governor of Mississippi. Okay, and you remember Nina Simone's song about Mississippi, right? You remember that as well. That, I mean, he said Mississippi always does the right thing. I'm trying to remember when did Mississippi do the right thing? I mean, you sound like a Spike Lee movie. When did Mississippi do the right thing? Well, when you came back into the Union, after you seceded from the Union, committed treason against the Union based upon Article 3, Section 3 of the U.S. Constitution because you want to maintain slavery. Okay, read this article here. Mississippi governor signs law limiting race in lessons. And we were talking about the Mississippi Plan in 1890, where the white supremacists in the state legislature in Mississippi rewrote the state constitution to impose poll taxes and literacy tests to suppress the African American vote. Critical race theory is, we're going to that clip I just sent you from CNN in just a second, Shakita. Critical race theory is an academic framework that examines how racism has shaped public policy and institutions such as the legal system, and how those have perpetuated the dominance of white people in society. Mississippi Superintendent of Education Kerry Wright said critical race theory is not taught in the state schools. Correct. Critical race theory is a legal analysis. It's usually taught in law school, in graduate schools, sometimes at the undergraduate level. Okay, but it's basically a legal analysis, usually taught by attorneys, law professors, things like this. Critical race theory is not taught in K through 12. The University of Mississippi Law School offers an elective class on critical race theory. Now, Mississippi has the highest percentage of African American residents of any state in the union at about 38%. Now, keep in mind, in 1910, basically 5 years before the Great Migration began, in 1910, 90% of African Americans lived in the South. I'll give you one guess why. That's a legacy of slavery. Today, Mississippi has the highest percentage of African American residents of any state, 38%. Along with other states in the Deep South, former Confederate states, including neighboring Alabama, former Confederate state. Alabama rewrote their state constitution in 1901 to codify white supremacy. That's not me saying that. That's Encyclopedia of Alabama that tells you that when you research their state constitution in 1901. Along with other states in the Deep South, including neighboring Alabama, it was a crucible of the civil rights movement. Okay, so I want to go to this clip here. We've played it before. You're going to hear Kimberlé Crenshaw, one of the architects of critical race theory. She's going to explain what critical race theory is and what it is not, and how this anti-critical race theory movement is a backlash to the social justice movement of the summer of 2020, the protests in the streets demanding justice for George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. We know March 13th was the anniversary of Breonna Taylor being killed. And then Ahmaud Arbery, things like this. Let's go to this clip from CNN, Shakita.
Critical race theory is.
Critical race theory?
Critical race theory.
No, I don't know. I can guess.
Guessing or not, across the country, a number of politicians are getting it wrong.
Critical race theory is a Marxist doctrine that rejects the vision of Martin Luther King Jr.
Absolutely false.
It's basically teaching kids to hate our country and to hate each other based on race.
False and slanderous.
Meet professor and scholar Kimberlé Crenshaw. Crenshaw is one of the founders of critical race theory, which she helped develop in the late 1980s. In short, critical race theory is an approach based on the idea that the history of white supremacy still has a very real and lasting impact on our society and institutions today.
Critical race theory just says, let's pay attention to what has happened in this country and how what has happened in this country is continuing to create differential outcomes so we can become that country that we say we are. So critical race theory is not anti-patriotic. In fact, it is more patriotic than those who are opposed to it, because we believe in the 13th and the 14th and the 15th Amendment. We believe in the promises of equality, and we know we can't get there if we can't confront and talk honestly about inequality.
Critical race theory is not a doctrine. It's not a manuscript. One way of describing it is looking with a critical eye at race and institutions. Let's take an example from history. The Declaration of Independence says all men are created equal. A critical race theorist would note that slavery persisted for almost 100 years after those words were written, and it was more than a century before women got the right to vote. So why is the term causing such a stir in conservative political circles today? This left-wing nonsense that suggests that any race is inherently inferior or racist or oppressive. Opponents are concerned critical race theory is or will be forced on students. Supporters say that critical race theory is not based on the view of this race is good, this race is bad. Supporters also say in the wake of protests and calls for racial equality in the past year, those unnerved by it are now using critical race theory as a catch-all term for everything related to race, politics, and education in this country. So says Princeton professor Imani Perry.
I think this is the sort of post-Trump era way of inciting anxiety, fear, and actually trying to sort of elicit a hostility towards the progress that I think we've begun to make in just the last couple of months.
To date, at least 8 states have taken steps to ban topics surrounding critical race theory without naming it, including Oklahoma.
We cannot revert to 100-year-old thinking that a person is any less valuable or inherently racist by the color of their skin.
To be clear, critical race theory does not say someone is racist because of the color of their skin. And it does not say anyone should be ashamed of themselves because of the color of their skin.
Still, some parents who hear the term are speaking out at school board meetings.
Just because I do not want critical race theory taught to my children in school does not mean that I'm a racist, damn it.
But Crenshaw says the theory is not about calling individuals racist, but looking at racism still ingrained in American institutions. And she says we have to talk about it.
If the censoring of all conversation about racism is called racism. That's what this move is really about. It's really not about a theory. It's really not about what's in people's hearts. It's about an effort to shut down all conversation about the sources and the reproduction of racial inequality.
Jason Carroll, CNN, New York.
All right. So you heard Kimberlé Crenshaw. You heard Dr. Imani Perry. Great reporting from Jason Carroll for CNN. When we come back from the break, we'll go to the phone lines. I want you to hear this conversation that Dr. Carol Anderson, who's a history professor at Emory University, had with 2 white parents in Georgia. And it was a civil conversation. They were asking questions about critical race theory. Okay. And she broke this down. Be sure to register for the online class I teach on Saturdays. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Maafa, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. I teach this. This is a 10-week online class. I teach Saturdays, 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We'll post the link here. We also have the information at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, and on our Facebook fan page, The African History Network, The African History Network. We'll be back in a few minutes. All right, stand by. Back from break in 4 minutes. Okay, I'm going to post a link here. You can register for the online class, Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Maafa, understanding the transatlantic slave trade. And as soon as you register, you can watch class we just did this past weekend. Class is on sale $60, regularly $130. We do the sessions live. All the sessions are archived and recorded. There's bonus content there as well. And then we have the information here. We have the bundle pack where you can register for both classes, from the Civil War to the Civil Rights Movement and Black Power, 1865 to 1968, and Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Maafa, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. You get both classes for $100. That's a $260 value. Back from break in 3 minutes. Back from break in 1 minute. Welcome back to the African History Network show right here on 910 AM Superstation, the Future Radio. All right, let's go quickly to the phone lines. We have, let me see, we have Wendy, line 1. Wendy, welcome to the African History Network show. Thanks for holding. Tell us where you're calling from.
Hey, Michael, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, I'm calling from Mississippi, and I am so glad that you brought this topic up and decided to discuss it. When I found out about the law that was signed, that Governor Tate Reeves signed this law,
right,
I was furious. I wanted to know, like, what I could do. I feel like if I'm silent about it, then, you know, history will never change. You know, Mississippi will never move forward.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that's part of my calling, but I don't know where to start. Like, what could I do, you know, to let Governor Tate Reeves know that what he's doing by trying to silence these learning institutions speaking freely is wrong. Right is right and wrong is wrong. You know, we know that America was founded and based off of racism.
Right.
We had laws, you know, that were in place, are in place that they abided by.
Right.
You know, that discriminated against Black people.
So
in the census, it says that Black people
let me
were.
Let me do this.
Our defenses, like if anyone is advocating for the census, it lets people know that
Right.
African Americans were considered as 1/5 of a citizen. So we were not even considered as citizens. And these are the same laws. You know, you want us to abide by the laws that are written into place today.
Wendy, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Slow down. Can you hear me? We're almost out of time. One was the African Americans were not 1/5 of a citizen or even 3/5 of a citizen. That's Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3 of the U.S. Constitution, which says for the purpose of taxation and apportionment, 3/5 of the population in bondage would be counted. That was determining how many seats in the House of Representatives slaveholding states would have. That was corrected by Section 2 of the 14th Amendment of 1868. But what you can do, one, is read the actual language of the bill so you understand what it is that you're talking about. If you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, I posted the link to the article. It has the link to Senate Bill 2113 in it, so you can read the language of the bill. Two, you can email, you can call his office, but we have to organize. I don't know which organizations you're a member of, but African-American organizations have to organize, put pressure on the state legislature, put pressure on the governor, but also when is Tate Reeves up for re-election? Because see, these Republicans have to be voted out of office, and the 2022 midterm election is a crucial election. Okay, I don't know what the margin is in the Mississippi State Legislature, but you all have to really organize and explain to people the issues and explain to people how the issues that you are concerned about keep getting voted against by who's in your state legislature, but also your House of Representatives as well, your U.S. House of Representatives. Okay, who's your member of U.S. House of Representatives? Which congressional district do you live in?
I think it's is it Pelosi?
No, Pelosi is in California. You say you live in Mississippi? Okay, so you want to find out who your member of the House of Representatives is. Okay, you can go to
Stephen Palazzo, United States Representative.
Who?
Stephen Palazzo.
Palazzo. Okay, from Mississippi. Which okay, so and then also if you don't know which congressional district you live in, so you can also contact him. Now he's in the House. He doesn't control the state legislature, but he probably knows people in the state legislature. But the number to the congressional switchboard And when you call the congressional switchboard, it asks for your zip code and it routes you to your members of the House of Representatives as well as your 2 U.S. senators. You have Cindy Hyde Smith is one, and I forgot the other senator from Mississippi. 202-224-3121 is the congressional switchboard. 202-224-3121 is the congressional switchboard. The congressional switchboard. So when you call, they'll ask you for your zip code. Usually you get an automated service, but sometimes you may get a human being. They'll ask for your zip code, and then based upon your zip code, they'll route you to your member of the House of Representatives and your 2 U.S. senators to their offices. Also, you can go to congress.gov, because at congress.gov, you can find out who your members of the House and Senate are as well. But we have to organize, okay? And these people have to be voted out of office, okay? All right.
Michael, did you know that I'm going to say this before you cut me off, or before I have to go? Did you know that Jackson State and the University of Southern Miss, they're both opposing that bill or that law? Did you know that both colleges are opposing that law?
Well, yeah. I'm not surprised, because this also impacts what can be taught in at the college level as well. What can be taught at the university level, not just K through 12. Okay, and this would impact the quality of conversations and the quality of teaching and curriculum when it comes to dealing with history, when it comes to dealing with racism, things like that. All right, look, we're out of time here, Wendy. Call back tomorrow night. We're on Monday through Friday, 11 p.m. to midnight Eastern Standard Time. Okay. All right. Thanks for calling. Okay, everybody, those watching on Facebook and YouTube, keep watching. We're going to keep going for a few more minutes. I want you to hear this conversation that Dr. Carol Anderson, who's a historian, had with 2 white parents in Georgia, and they were asking questions about critical race theory. Okay, be sure to register for the online classes I teach on Saturdays and Sundays: Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Maafa. Understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach in school. This is a 10-week online class that I teach. We deal with thousands of years of history, what leads up to the transatlantic slave trade taking place. I do a PowerPoint presentation with book references, articles, video clips, all of that. I'm posting a link here and also at our Facebook fan page, The African History Network, The African History Network. We have the information there as well. Okay. And you can support the African History Network. We're celebrating our 12th year anniversary. March 10th, 2010 is when I first started hosting the African History Network show. $, the AHN show through Cash App, $, the AHN show through Cash App, also through PayPal, paypal.me/the AHN show. Remember, right now it's correct wrong behavior. It's not over till we win. Wakanda forever. And we'll talk to you tomorrow. Peace. All right, stand by. All right, stand by. Let me cue this up. I want you to hear this conversation, because Dr. Carol Anderson is a brilliant historian, and I've seen her work before. I've seen interviews. I've read articles where she's quoted. So let me pull this up here just a second. All right. Follow us on our Facebook fan page, The AHN Show, the Cash App. The AHN Show on Facebook, The African History Network on Facebook, I should say. Follow us on our Facebook fan page, The African History Network, on Facebook and on YouTube, Michael Imhotep, IMHOTEP. Turn on live notifications so you know when we go live, so you know when we broadcast, because people don't get on Facebook, for some reason, people don't get notified. A lot of people don't get notified when we go live. I'm still trying to figure that one out. All right, let me cue this up here. So this is from Channel 11 Alive in Georgia. Parents skeptical of critical race theory talk to experts. Okay. And you have parents, Bart, and let me see here. Let me back this up. You have parents, Bart and Collie Glasgow from Canton, Georgia. And they interviewed Dr. Carol Anderson, who's a professor of, she's a professor of history at Emory University. And they interview her about critical race theory and how it's taught in schools. Okay, we'll go to that in just a second. Be sure to read check out the article from NBC News, and I had it up on the screen while we were dealing with the other topic, dealing with Mississippi. This article here deals with what really started the whole fight over critical race theory. Okay. This is from NBC News, how Trump ignited the fight over critical race theory in schools. How Trump ignited the fight over critical race theory in schools. Republican lawmakers across the country have proposed bills to ban critical race theory in K through 12 schools. Here's what that really means. Now, this is an article from May 10th, 2021. And they deal with how all this stuff blew up about critical race theory, because critical race theory started being developed in the late 1960s. Okay, critical race theory is like 40 years old. So how all of a sudden did it just become a lightning rod, and now you have these anti-critical race theory laws being passed? It goes back to September 2020. There was a September 2020 memo that Donald Trump did, the traitor-in-chief, when he was president. Conservative leaders have been accused of using the decades-old academic term, initially intended to recognize the systemic racism inherent in America, but Republicans are using critical race theory. They're misusing the term and using it as a catch-all. They're using the term critical race theory as a catch-all for anti-racism and diversity efforts. Okay, so anything that they don't like dealing with race and racism, things like this, they call it critical race theory, which is false. They have no clue what critical race theory is. The proposed policies mimic former President Donald Trump's September 2020 memo ordering the Office of Management and Budget to stop funding training on critical race theory for federal employees, calling it a propaganda effort. This is what Trump did. He called it a propaganda effort. This was September 2020. This was the impetus of all this. Then you have the attacks on the 1619 Project and Nicole Hannah-Jones. Around the same time, Donald Trump condemned the 1619 Project, a Pulitzer Prize winning 2019 New York Times report led by reporter Nicole Hannah-Jones that holds America was truly founded not in 1776, but in 1619, when the first enslaved Africans, even though they ain't had chattel slavery in 1619 in any of the 13 colonies, first colony to have codified slave laws in Massachusetts is 1641. But anyway, and there's some problems with the 1619 Project. I've talked about this before, but it totally skips over the African presence that was here for at least 51,700 years, even before Native Americans came into existence. But anyway, but in 1619, when the first enslaved people were brought to the British colonies, and they're put into a form of indentured servitude and released after 3 to 5 years. Okay. The Spanish were taking Africans into the territory we call South Carolina and Georgia in 1526. That's 93 years before 1619. Educators embraced this message and began utilizing the 1619 Project and looking for resources to teach a more holistic history of the country. Donald Trump rebuked the project. He's ignorant of history. He said he didn't even know about the year 1619. He knew about 1776. That's how stupid he is. Trump rebuked the project as a warped, distorted portrayal of American history. Both the memo and this attack sparked the commission of the 1776 report meant to combat the contents of the 1619 project. Luckily, when Joe Biden became president, he removed the 1776 project off of whitehouse.gov and disbanded the 1776 commission that Trump had convened. The countrywide uprisings in the wake of George Floyd's death only fueled the matter, with pundits debating the nation's fraught history of racism. Thus, although President Joe Biden reversed Donald Trump's initial ban in January 2021, when Joe Biden became president, took the oath of office January 20th, 2021, 14 days after an insurrection incited by the traitor-in-chief. But the seed had already been planted. This is an example of how elections have consequences. This was what I was warning people about Trump in 2016. I said Trump has to be stopped. And people thought the election was about one person. I'm like, no. If you understood Richard Nixon in 1968, who was a backlash to the civil rights movement and the Black Power movement, and he was a backlash to the rebellions taking place across the country, and Richard Nixon ran on the platform of law and order. And law and order means protect white people and lock up African Americans. If you understood Richard Nixon in 68, we would have seen Trump coming in 2016 and stop him, because part of Trump's platform was law and order, which was a throwback to Richard Nixon. And Trump was a backlash to 2 terms of President Barack Obama. He was a backlash to the changing culture in America, and America becoming less white, population-wise. He's a backlash to all of that. He's a backlash to the Black Lives Matter movement, all of that. Okay, let's go to this interview with Dr. Carol Anderson, historian.
University, sorry. I'm Coley Glasgow. I'm a dental hygienist, and I've been working 30 years.
Oh, so you started working when you were 3?
I did. Right out of
Anderson, and I'm a professor of African American Studies, and I'm a historian at Emory University. Sorry.
I'm Coley Glasgow. I'm a dental hygienist, and I've been working 30 years.
Oh, so you started working when you were 3?
I did. Right out of high school. I went right in.
Wow.
After high school.
Wow.
And I'm Bart Glasgow, and I'm an attorney in Atlanta.
Okay, it's nice meeting you, Bart and Coley.
It's our pleasure.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for just agreeing to meet with us, because I know, I mean, you're well written. You've got lots of. I know you've been called on many different venues to give your expertise. So I'm just appreciative. We're both appreciative that you took the time to come and talk and answer questions that we may have on the issue of critical race theory being taught in schools, or just critical race theory. So, one of the first questions I had, because honestly, I think that our society's gotten to a point to where most news shows, it's just you put up a protagonist and an antagonist, and it's just back and forth. So, just to make sure, how would you define critical race theory to just like a layman, just somebody like us?
Critical race theory, thank you for that question. Critical race theory is a legal theory developed out of Harvard Law. And what it looks at the ways that the law creates race, and then the way that the law sustains inequality via racism. So when you think about, for instance, there's a wonderful article by a scholar named Cheryl Harris, and it was called Whiteness as Property. And what she looked at there was the way that whites would sue in court if the press identified them as Negro, identified them as Black. And they were like, this is an assault on my identity. This is an assault. And being called Negro carried with it damages. And so it was whiteness as property, how whites carry with them a value system in this nation. And so that's critical race theory looks at the ways that the law develops race and the way that it sustains racism.
Okay. And that brings up a good point, because you were talking about how the law creates race. So, I mean, because to me personally, I don't think there is such a thing as race. I think it's a kind of a social construct, or maybe even a legal construct. I think we're all part of the same race, just different ethnicities, different, have different identities, but not different races. So it is basically taking how the law creates race. And how would you say the law created race? And that wasn't a question I had, but I mean, you brought it up, so I thought.
Yeah, and I've never heard that before. I'm interested.
Yeah, and so it is, for instance, during slavery, it was the way that the law began to identify who was enslaved and who could be free and who could be a citizen. And it did that by identifying racial characteristics. And so you have in the 1740 Negro Act of South Carolina, where it says that the enslaved African descendants people will always be enslaved for now and for those not yet born. And so it was the way that the law began to create this stratification. And that's how the law begins to create race.
Okay. So things like the Dred Scott decision, where it says that, a black person is counted as 3/5 of a person for census or for, state representation. That's kind of the same thing. Maybe not statutory, but our Supreme Court in history has said that.
Right. So when that Dred Scott decision said, look, a black person cannot be a citizen. They weren't considered a citizen at the founding of this nation in the Constitution. They weren't considered a citizen. If they were considered citizens, they'd be able to carry the mail. If they were considered citizens, they'd be able to get a passport. If they would be able to be considered citizens, they would be able to cross state lines easily, and they would be able to carry a gun wherever they wanted to. So clear, and then, as you know, there is that key statement from Chief Justice Roger Taney that a black man has no rights that a white man is bound to respect. Yeah, Dred Scott, and that decision, as you know, was you had President James Buchanan working with Chief Justice Roger Taney going, okay, I need you to have a decision that's going to put the nail in the coffin for this secession movement. This is going to stop what looks like it's a brewing civil war. So if you make it really clear that black people cannot be citizens, we ought to be good. Instead, folks were like, what did he just say? And it's like, okay, we're done. We're done. Yeah.
Well, that Dred Scott decision was awful dreadful. It really was. It was a terrible decision. But of course, they were we hope that we've made some improvements since then. So I guess one of the questions I had is like now, today, because clearly there was Jim Crow laws that made it impossible for blacks to vote, even though they were given the right to vote. And there were, you look at Dr. King's movement, what they stood for. And I tell you this, I get kind of chills thinking about this because I love civil disobedience. I love it. My undergraduate was in political science and philosophy. My senior thesis was on studying the civil disobedient movements of Henry David Thoreau, Mahatma Gandhi, and Martin Luther King Jr. I think what Dr. King did was amazing. To take that biblical principle of turning the other cheek and to show love when hate's being shown to you. And I think that's why he said, only love can cast out hate, and so he was just, I just loved what he stood for.
So the question I have when people say stuff like that, now you're going to talk about the black men around Dr. King that had guns to protect him because white people were trying to kill him. You going to talk about that? Or, because if it had not been for Negroes with guns, it would not have been a civil rights movement. It was Negroes with guns protecting the civil rights workers the best they could when they were doing their nonviolent civil disobedience, to protect them from the Klan and the white supremacists and the bigots, and to protect them because the sheriffs oftentimes would not provide them proper protection so they could exercise their First Amendment rights, or they would give the Klan enough time to come in, beat them up, and then the sheriff will come. So you're gonna, I mean, see, this is why this book right here is so important. By Professor Charles E. Cobb Jr. And I think it's here in one of the stacks. I need another book. I need a couple more bookshelves. Where is it? This nonviolent stuff will get you killed. How guns made the civil rights movement possible. Hold on, where's that book? I think it's here. I think it's here in the stack right next to me. I need to find this. Yeah, this book right here. Now, this is by Professor Charles E. Cobb Jr., who was a field secretary for SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, for 5 years in rural Mississippi. And he was down there registering African Americans to vote. You know how dangerous that was in Mississippi? Goodman, Schwerner, and Cheney were killed June 21st, 1964, civil rights workers. Okay? And the name of this book, This Nonviolent Stuff Will Get You Killed, how guns made the civil rights movement possible. He talks about the guns Dr. King owned until Bayard Rustin convinced Dr. King to get rid of his guns, because all those people, Raymond Parks, Rosa Parks' husband, Fannie Lou Hamer owned guns, Medgar Evers owned guns. You grew up in the South, you grew up in the gun culture. And a lot of them grew up on farms, things like this. Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth owned guns. Okay. They had to have guns to protect themselves from people trying to kill them. Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth's house was firebombed. Dr. King's house was firebombed twice in 1956 during the Montgomery bus boycott. So when we talk about the civil rights movement, it's not no turn the other cheek. It was ostensibly, on the surface, it was nonviolent. But Professor James Small has told me personally, and as other scholars, and when you do the research, the civil rights movement was not a nonviolent movement. If it had not been for Negroes with guns, there would not have been a civil rights movement. But this is what happens when people don't read. This is even before the Deacons for Defense and Justice. The Deacons for Defense and Justice were following along in that tradition. They weren't founded until 1964. The Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, they're partly inspired by, they take a page from the Deacons for Defense and Justice. They're partly inspired by that also. Okay, that armed resistance. But we have a history of armed resistance, especially in the South. We have a history of armed resistance when brothers came back home after World War I, and you had the Red Summer 1919, and these former African-American World War I soldiers are out in the streets with their guns, some of them in their military uniforms, protecting their communities when these race riots break out. There were over 25 major race riots in this country in 1919, the year after World War I ended in 1918. It was called the Red Summer. James Weldon Johnson of the NAACP named it the Red Summer because the streets of America were flowing with blood. There was a huge race riot in Chicago in 1919 as well. That was part of it. You had the Lane, Arkansas massacre in 1919. You had over 200 sharecroppers killed because they were trying to organize to get higher wages. Okay. All right, let's go back to this clip here. So this is Dr. Carol Anderson, and she's speaking with these two white parents in Georgia, Canton, Georgia, and she's explaining critical race theory to them.
Today, with what particular laws is it that you think critical race theory may be needed to address, or how does it address those issues that are maybe in our society, in law, in morality? I don't see the express racism like we would see with Jim Crow laws. I mean, those are with the Dred Scott decision. That's just express. That's just clear to everybody. What are the laws now that you feel like that critical race theory addresses, and why it's important?
I love that. Thank you. So one of the things that I talked about in my book, White Rage, was undoing the civil rights movement. How do you take on those incredible accomplishments of the civil rights movement? The Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And you do it by what Ian Haney Lopez, a professor, calls dog whistle politics, where you talk about law and order, you talk about welfare queens, and you cast that in terms of, you racialize it, so that crime is seen as a Black thing. This is what Black people do. They are inherently criminal. And it's language that we had in the 1740 Negro Act, and it comes through in our laws dealing, for instance, that led to mass incarceration, where you had the disparities in sentencing for having cocaine and for having crack. So, and that disparity meant that, I'm going to get these figures wrong, but it's like if you had to have 10 times, for equal amounts, you got 10 times a higher sentence for crack than you did for cocaine. And it's because crack was so prevalent, more prevalent in the Black community, and you had hyper policing happening in that community. When we look at the studies, what we see is that African Americans don't do drugs more than anybody else. In fact, they do drugs the least. Where they're equal is with the use of marijuana. But when it comes to the hard drugs, they do drugs the least of any racial or ethnic group in the United States. But the ways that the laws are written is that they are incarcerated at a much higher rate. So how do we incarcerate more for doing drugs the least? That's that inequality that is built into the law, built into the system that we're talking about here. And that's what critical race theory is looking at, because it asks the question, for instance, Derek Bell, who was one of the key architects of critical race theory, asked the question, how is it that we could have the Brown decision, that landmark decision, Brown 1 and Brown 2, and still have schools more segregated than ever? How does that happen? And it happens through a series of laws coming in. So we had the laws that provided for shutting down the public school system, that then provided state-funded tuition for white children to go to all-white private academies, and there was nothing for Black children. So like in Prince Edward County, Virginia, where they shut down the school system for 5 years. Imagine being in the 5th grade and your school system shuts down and it doesn't open up again until you're in the 10th. Imagine everything that you've lost. And by that time, then the laws that came into being dealt with providing opportunities for white parents to be able to have the choice to move their child out of that school if it was threatened with desegregation. So when you're asking about how do these laws work, that's how they work. They work through the criminal justice system. They don't have to say, let me back up. Even the Jim Crow laws dealing with voting, because of the 15th Amendment that says the state shall not abridge the right to vote on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. So Mississippi, you know I was going to Mississippi, didn't you? So in the Mississippi Plan of 1890, they said, okay, we don't want Black folks to vote, but we can't write a law like we used to write saying we don't want Black folks to vote. So what are we going to do? We're going to use the legacies of slavery and make those legacies the access to the ballot box. And that way it looks like it's fine.
It's open to anybody who can read.
It's open to anybody who can read and anybody who can pay the poll tax. And so it doesn't deal with the fact that you had African Americans who were killed because they dared to learn how to read. And it doesn't deal with the fact that you have unequal funding of Black schools, so that, those schools were shutting down. They weren't even open for most of the school year, and most of them didn't go. Some of them didn't go beyond the 5th or 6th grade. And so to require then that they read a section of the Constitution, like they had a Harvard law degree, and then interpret it to the liking of the registrar. And right, and so you get the Williams decision of 1898 that basically says the poll tax and the literacy test do not violate the 15th Amendment because everybody has to pay and everybody has to read. And so that way you can deny African Americans access by using the kinds of societally created characteristics for those people, for them, and use those characteristics as the access to the ballot box. And so that's what happened with the poll tax and the literacy test. And it's what we're dealing with now as we're looking at these battles over voting that also look race neutral on its surface, but looking at the characteristics of inequality that have been born over centuries of this nation's history.
Yeah, and I want to get to that. That's one of the questions that would be great to go to. But and I want you to chime in whenever. You brought up schools and you brought up desegregation and integration, and and there was a recent story about an Atlanta public school whose principal decided that in whatever grade level, and I tell you as an attorney, all of them are allegations until it's actually proven, but it seems to be that the principal thought it was a good idea to segregate classes on the basis of color. There were, I think, 2 black classes and 4 white classes. And I think it was a black parent who discovered that and was very taken back and thought, why would you do this? And because she wanted her child moved to another teacher's room, she didn't know anything about it. And from what I understand, the administrator said it wouldn't work because she'd be by herself. She would not be, because that's a white class. And it kind of took me back. If it's true, it took me back to because my understanding is the principal that runs the school it is himself black. And I just trying to figure out how would critical race theory condone that, endorse that in any way? Or would there be some kind of a reasoning why it might